The star Series 9 burned like a dying ember in the cold void of space, its light weak and red, casting long shadows over the battered fleet that floated silently in its orbit. The Valeri, proud and ancient, now reduced to fragments of their once glorious power. Their ships, graceful arcs of silver and crystal, flickered with failing shields and exposed hulls. 1,000 years of exploration and peacekeeping reduced to the final desperate stand of a species on the edge of extinction. High Commander Zero Talon stood at the main viewport of the Valeri Ascendancy, the last command vessel still fully functional. Though functional was a generous word, half the reactor was gone, the main weapons grid offline, and the crew down to less than a third. His eyes, violet and luminous, stared into the dark, waiting for the swarm that would soon come to finish what it had started. The Karneks were not a race in the traditional sense. They were a machine mind, an ever-growing hive of artificial intelligence born from unknown origins, expanding without mercy, wiping out everything that could not be assimilated or stripped for raw materials. For centuries, the Valeri had tried diplomacy, warnings, and later, limited warfare, but the Karneks never responded, never retreated, never even acknowledged their messages. They only advanced, system by system, tearing worlds apart until only silence remained. Now, Series 9 was next, and with it, the last remnants of Valeri resistance. Zero turned to his second-in-command, a younger officer named Saralin, whose face bore fresh scars from the last engagement above Draken's reach. "No signals responded?" he asked quietly, though he already knew the answer. Saralin shook her head. "No. We sent out the last deep-range beacon 2 cycles ago. No known allies are within response range. The humans, even if they received it, they'd never arrive in time." The name hung in the air like a ghost. Humans. The Valeri's first contact with them had been years ago, during the Orion Rift incident, when the Terran colony ship Enduring Light had wandered into Valeri space. Back then, the humans were small, primitive compared to Valeri standards, but determined, stubborn, and unpredictable. Zero had served in that campaign, and he remembered their grit, their fierce loyalty to each other, and how they refused to abandon even one of their own. Strange creatures, humans, so short-lived, yet so loud and bold, like fire in the cold of space. But the Valeri had retreated from contact after political divisions grew at home, and the Terrans had respected the distance, moving on to form their own little corner of the stars. Still, some part of Zero had always wondered what they would become, and now, on the edge of annihilation, he found himself wishing they had stayed in touch. The proximity alert howled through the bridge like a scream, jolting everyone into motion. Red glyphs danced across the displays as the Karneks fleet arrived not in orderly formation, but as a seething tide of blackened metal, a swarm of ships so tightly clustered that it looked like a second night sky had opened up, blotting out the stars. The crew moved quickly, activating what little defenses they had left, scrambling fighters, rerouting power to shields, and preparing to sell their lives dearly. "All ships," Zero called into the fleet-wide channel, his voice steady despite the dread curling in his chest. "This is High Commander Talon. We do not run. We do not surrender. We are Valeri, and this is our stand. Fight well. Die with purpose." A chorus of affirmations followed, and then the swarm fell upon them. Karnek's vessels slammed into Valeri ships like hammers, tearing through the elegant crystal structures with savage precision. Automated drones swarmed through the gaps, firing with no emotion, no hesitation. The Valeri countered as best they could, their ships moving with fluid coordination, unleashing bright arcs of plasma and gravity mines, taking down dozens of enemy units, But for every Karnak's drone that fell, 10 more took its place. Zeral's hands flew over the control console, rerouting tactical commands directly as his tactical AI had been destroyed in the last wave. Bring the Alarin up to Sector 9 and fire the lance array now, he barked. The massive beam of condensed plasma lanced through the void, slicing a hole in the center of the Karnak's vanguard. But already the swarm was closing it again, like flesh healing over a wound. One of the rear ships, the Vostrail, exploded in a sudden, blinding burst. Its containment core breached, another friend gone, another name etched into the fading legacy of his people. On the bridge, sparks flew as consoles overloaded, and the ship groaned like a wounded beast. Zeral steadied himself, ignoring the smoke, the heat, the rising death toll flashing across his screen. They had minutes left, maybe. Minutes before the swarm reached the command ship. Minutes before the Valari were wiped from existence. He made a decision. Activate the final pulse beacon, he said quietly to Cerilyn. One last signal. Send it on every frequency, every language. Aim it at the Terran border. If anyone is out there, if anyone still listens. She nodded and typed in the command. Across the void, a pulse of golden energy burst from the Valari Ascendancy, a cry not of fear, but of honor. A cry for help from a people who had never asked for it before. The swarm began breaching the outer hull. Decks fell silent as crew after crew went dark. Zeral closed his eyes for a moment, remembering the twin moons of Valari Prime, the scent of the air on a world that might no longer exist, the songs of his ancestors. Then he opened his eyes and stood straight. Prepare for close quarters defense, he ordered. If they take this ship, they do it through us. Cerilyn handed him a pulse rifle. The lights dimmed. Explosions rocked the ship as Karnak's drones breached the final corridors. On the edge of silence, with the stars watching like cold witnesses, the last warriors of the Valari made their stand, blades humming, rifles burning, voices raised in battle cries that echoed through the dying halls. And far across the galaxy, the Golden Pulse reached a lonely Terran recon ship drifting on the edge of known space, and a human captain looked up from her console, eyes narrowing as the ancient Valari signal lit up her screen. Humanity had just heard the call. Far across the galaxy from the burning skies of Series 9, on the quiet edge of Terran-controlled space, the deep space reconnaissance vessel Raven's Talon drifted slowly between the stars, its dark hull glinting faintly in the light of a distant blue sun, surrounded by nothing but cold silence. And the endless void. Captain Mira Holden stood alone on the bridge, her hands clasped behind her back, staring into the distance as if trying to see beyond the stars. She was a war veteran, sharp-eyed and silent, a woman shaped by battles long past ones that still echoed in her dreams, and though her ship had been on a routine scan mission for weeks, her mind had never truly been at rest. The crew was small, just 40 strong, and the mission's simple map uncharted systems, monitor subspace drift, and report back anything unusual. So when the signal came through, it didn't sound like anything they had expected. It came without warning, slicing through the silence like a whisper from the dead, a pulse of energy that lit up the comms console with strange symbols, ancient Valari script, and audio frequencies too elegant, too precise to be noise. Ensign Lara, the ship's comms officer, called Mira over, her voice tight. Captain, you need to hear this. Mira approached, brow furrowed as the message played again, a Valari distress beacon, encoded with what seemed like layers of emotion, a kind of musical logic, beautiful yet desperate, the kind of thing Mira hadn't heard since she was a junior officer back during first contact. The message was short, but it was enough. It was a call for help, not just a warning, but a final plea. Mira stared at the console, the glyphs flickering like fading fireflies, and a chill crept down her spine. The Valeri hadn't sent a signal to humans in over 20 years, not since diplomatic relations had broken down. To hear from them now at this time, from this corner of space, meant something terrible was happening. Mira turned to her exo-commander, Rafe Nylan, a quiet man with cold logic and steady hands. "Send the signal to command," she ordered. "Full priority. Tag it with my personal authorization code." Rafe raised an eyebrow. "HQ won't like us sticking our noses into alien affairs." "I'm not sticking," Mira replied. "I'm listening." Within hours, the signal reached Terra Central Command, and the response came back just as quickly, but not as expected. Normally, bureaucracy would bury something like this for days, maybe weeks. But this time, the council convened immediately. The reason was simple. Intelligence reports from outposts along the Karnax border had been coming in, stations going dark, missing ships, sudden losses in communication. Humanity had always watched the Karnax from a distance, aware of their hunger, cautious of their aggression, but confident in their own defenses. Now, it appeared the machines were moving again, and this Valari signal was no coincidence. Mira was ordered to redirect to the secure station Aegis Red, a hidden orbital command base where high-ranking officers, scientists, and political envoys gathered in secret. When Raven's Talon docked, Mira was ushered straight to the war room, where the air buzzed with tension. Holographic maps filled the chamber, showing red zones spreading across Valari space like fire through dry grass. Admiral Jonas Reek, the legendary fleet strategist and commander of the United Terran Vanguard, stood at the center of it all, arms crossed, his voice calm but hard. "The Valeri are falling," he said to the gathered group, "and the Karnax are not going to stop there." This distress signal is not just a cry for help. It's a warning. If we let the Valeri fall, we're next. Some argued against intervention, citing old treaties and the risk of provoking the Karnax. Others said humanity owed the Valeri nothing, that when the Terran colonies were struggling during the expansion wars, the Valeri had turned away, refusing aid. But Mira stepped forward and spoke, not with anger, but with resolve. "Maybe they turned their backs, but maybe we shouldn't, because we are not them. And if we stand by and watch another species die, what do we become?" There was a silence, a long one, until finally Admiral Reek gave the order, "Mobilize the 5 Terran Vanguard fleet. Immediate jump to Series 9. The announcement sent ripples across every military channel. Hundreds of warships, carriers, and support vessels began their hyperspace preparations, drawn from patrols, stations, and defense zones across the region. The Raven's Talon, despite being lightly armed, was ordered to lead the initial recon jump, guiding the rest of the fleet into position through unstable gravitational fields near Series 9. Mira returned to her ship, her crew scrambling to prepare for a mission none of them had expected. As they locked in coordinates and charged the jump drive, Mira stood in the center of the bridge, feeling the hum of the engines rise beneath her feet. She thought of the Valeri she'd once met, tall, graceful beings who spoke in harmonics and moved like wind through water. She remembered their kindness, their curiosity, and the way they had looked at humans not with fear, but with wonder. She remembered Zeril Talon, the Valeri commander she had once met on a diplomatic mission, and wondered if he was still alive. Then the stars stretched, twisted, and vanished. The Raven's Talon dropped into the Series 9 system, and the sight that met them was worse than any of their simulations had predicted. The planet was gone, nothing but debris and blackened ash. Orbiting it were the shattered remains of Valari ships, glowing dimly in the dying light of the red star. The swarm was still there, massive and shifting like a sea of metal waiting for the next wave. But within that sea, Mira's sensors found something. A signal. Weak, faint, but alive. It was the Valari ascendancy. "Lock coordinates," Mira said quickly. "Prepare for retrieval. And get that signal back to the fleet." As the Raven's talon sped toward the wreckage, weaving through clouds of Karnak's drones, Mira watched the tactical screen light up. The Five-Thief fleet had begun its arrival. One by one, Terran warships dropped out of hyperspace heavy cruisers, stealth frigates, drone carriers, their hulls gleaming with energy as they moved into formation. Admiral Reek's voice came through the comms, clear and commanding. "All units engage. Show them what it means to challenge humanity." The first wave struck fast. Terran fighters darted through the Karnak's lines, using flares and burst drives to avoid the swarm's laser webs. Railguns fired kinetic shells that shattered Karnak's hulls into glowing fragments. EMP torpedoes burst across their lines, disabling Central Command ships. The Karnaks responded with brutal force, but the Terrans fought differently, adaptive, unpredictable, using three-dimensional movement and feints the machines struggled to calculate. Mira's ship reached the crippled Valari flagship just as its core started to flicker. She, personally, led the boarding team, stepping onto a bridge half covered in smoke and broken crystal. Zero Talon stood waiting, wounded but alive, his posture proud even in defeat. He looked at her, surprise flashing across his alien features. "Human?" he said, his voice hoarse. "You came?" Mira nodded once. "We don't leave people behind." Together, they returned to Raven's Talon, and as Zero looked out the viewport and saw the Terran fleet moving in coordinated fury across the battlefield, he realized something that filled him with a strange mix of shame and awe. Humanity had grown. They were no longer the uncertain, wide-eyed explorers of decades past. They were warriors, defenders, and in this darkest hour, they had answered a call not meant for them. As the battle raged and the Karnaks began to fall back, the stars around Series 9 lit up with war and fire. But beneath it all, a seed of something ancient and powerful stirred once more. Hope. The battle for Series 9 was far from over, and though the arrival of the 5 Terran Vanguard fleet had pushed the Karnak swarm back temporarily, everyone on the command decks knew it was only the beginning. The Karnaks never truly retreated. They recalculated, regrouped, and returned stronger, learning from every strike. On board the Raven's Talon, Captain Mira Holden stood beside the injured Valari commander, Zero Talon, watching the stars flicker with the signs of distant conflict as the swarm reorganized. Terran warships moved between wreckage and debris fields like silent predators, hunting down lingering drones. But already the scanners were picking up another incoming wave, larger, colder, and more coordinated. Zero's voice was quiet, heavy with centuries of war. "They'll come again, stronger. They always do." Mira nodded grimly and turned to her communications officer. "Signal Sol Command. We need the core fleets now." Back on Earth, deep within the mountain-shielded fortress of Sol Defense Command, the emergency beacon from Series 9 arrived just as the first reports of Karnak's incursions near outer Terran colonies started to surface. The news hit like a thunderbolt across every level of military leadership. Sol Command was Earth's final gate, the heart of humanity's power, and it had remained silent for years, choosing to project force only when absolutely necessary. But now it had no choice. The Karnaks were on the move. Inside the war chamber, massive holographic displays flickered with movement reports, fleet positions, and lost projections. General Thorne, commander of the Soul Core forces, stood with his hands behind his back, jaw tight, as he studied the ever-growing swarm signatures building around Series 9. "If we lose there, they'll cut through the border systems like knives through cloth," he said to his staff. "We can't allow it." Within minutes, he issued the highest-level deployment order, Soul Mobilization Protocol, a rarely used command that pulled forces from Earth, Mars, Europa, and even the deep Titan shipyards. In the dry dock rings of Jupiter, entire squadrons of dreadnoughts powered up, blue energy cores flaring to life for the first time in years. The old warships of the Second Expansion era, mothballed and hidden from public view, now roared awake, bristling with weapons and fresh Terran battle AI. Thousands of trained crew members poured into them like blood returning to a sleeping giant. Back at Series 9, the second Karnax wave struck faster than expected. They came in from multiple angles, split into shards of darkness that overwhelmed the outer Terran picket lines before any warning could be given. Several smaller frigates were lost instantly, torn apart by focused energy bursts. The VTS Harrow, a fast-response destroyer, was hit directly in its reactor core, exploding in a flash of light that shook Mira's ship from half a sector away. "They're adapting," shouted Rafe. Mira's XO, as the tactical map flickered with chaotic motion. "They've changed formation, they're targeting weak flanks." Mira's mind raced as she issued new commands, ordering Terran forces into a defensive dome around the wounded Valari vessels still under protection. Fighters launched in swarms, creating makeshift barriers, while gravity torpedoes were fired into approaching clusters, tearing holes in the enemy tide. But it was only a matter of time. Then, just as things were about to collapse, something massive dropped out of hyperspace, a ship so large that it blocked out part of the starfield behind it. It was the Soul Titan-class warship Invictus, the pride of Earth's fleet, surrounded by an armada of reinforcements. One by one, more ships jumped in behind it, battleships, heavy carriers, stealth cruisers, all bearing the insignia of Soul Defense. They formed a wall of steel and fire between the dying Valari fleet and the advancing Karnak swarm. The Invictus opened fire with its main gun, a plasma lance capable of slicing a small moon in half. The beam tore through the center of the swarm, vaporizing thousands of drones in a single, deafening instant. Shock rippled through the Karnak's ranks. They hesitated. The machines, for once, seemed to reassess. "Soul forces are here," Mira whispered, watching the tide shift. They came. The Terran fleet, now complete, pressed forward like a storm. Coordinated fire swept across the battlefield as the newest AI systems adapted to Karnak's tactics in real time. Human and Valari ships fought side by side, old enemies standing united against a threat that neither could survive alone. Drones fell like hail under the pressure of combined firepower, and for the first time in hours, the battle began to turn. On the bridge of the Invictus, General Thorne himself issued direct orders, his voice steady and sure. "All units drive them back. Take back the field." Zeril, watching it all unfold from Mira's ship, could hardly believe what he saw. He had once thought humans were too young, too reckless, too fractured to survive in the wider galaxy. But here they were fighting with discipline, with strategy, with unity. And they were winning. As the Karnaks began to fall into disarray, fragments of their fleet spiraling off into retreat vectors, Mira knew this battle was only the first of many. The swarm had not been destroyed, only delayed. But the message had been sent. Humanity would not stand aside. They would fight. They would protect. They would answer the call, no matter who sent it. And the galaxy, silent and watching, would remember. The battle over Series 9 was won, but victory brought little peace, only a strange quiet that settled across the Terran and Valari fleets like the breath between storms. Smoke still drifted through the shattered hulls of broken ships, while debris fields shimmered like metal rain around the wounded planet. Captain Mira Holden stood on the bridge of the Raven's Talon, eyes fixed on the tactical display, where the remnants of the Karnak swarm flickered on the edge of scanner range, just out of reach, like shadows waiting for darkness to return. Beside her, Commander Zero Talon leaned heavily against a support rail, his wounds mostly treated, his armor scorched and patched, but his voice steady as he spoke. "They will come again, in greater force." That was only a testing wave. Mira nodded, feeling the weight of his words press against her chest. She had fought in battles before, but never like this. The Karnaks were not just enemies, they were machines without mercy, without hesitation, and they learned with every strike. Reinforcements from Sol now held the system, the Invictus and her sister ships forming a strong defensive wall, but everyone knew it would not hold forever. That was why Mira had asked for a council, a rare meeting between species who had once trusted each other, then turned away. The war room aboard the Invictus was quiet when she entered, filled with officers, envoys, and data displays showing the full scale of the destruction. On one side stood Terran generals and admirals, on the other, Valari commanders, their tall, luminous forms cloaked in flowing armor, their eyes deep with ancient sorrow. For a moment, no one spoke. The past lingered like a ghost between them, the silence of unanswered calls, the memory of old battles, the sharp edge of betrayal. Then Zyril stepped forward, his voice low but strong. "We were wrong to turn away from humanity all those years ago. We thought ourselves wiser, more advanced, but we forgot what it meant to fight for others, to stand together." Mira glanced at General Thorne, who said nothing but gave a short nod. Slowly, the room shifted. A fragile connection, long broken, was beginning to mend. Together, they began to plan. The Karnak's home systems were still unknown, their networks hidden in deep space, but their pattern of attack followed a logic always targeting vulnerable systems, always seeking to divide, never strike when unity was strong. Using Terran long-range sensors and Valari data archives, the new alliance began mapping possible strike zones, identifying where the next invasion might occur. Mira was assigned to a joint strike team, commanding both Terran and Valari units, a symbol of their cooperation. Her mission was to travel to the edge of a distant sector called Varnus Reach, where a listening post had recently gone silent. The region was rich in dark matter, a resource both sides needed, but also something the Karnaks had begun harvesting with their strange weapon factories. It was likely a trap, but they had to know. The Raven's Talon departed within hours, flanked by 2 Valari interceptors and a Sol-based stealth cruiser. As they entered Varnus Reach, the first thing they noticed was the silence, no chatter, no energy signals, no signs of life. The station that once floated in orbit above the planet was gone, its pieces scattered like dust. But something remained. A faint signal, weak and broken, coming from deep within the planet's surface. Mira ordered a drop team immediately, taking a small shuttle down with Zyril and a unit of mixed soldiers. The surface was black glass, scorched from orbital bombardment, and strange machine fragments poked out of the ground like bones. They followed the signal into a ravine, deeper and deeper, until they found it a hidden Valari lab, buried beneath stone, barely functional. Inside, A single survivor huddled near a power core Valari, young, terrified. He spoke in fractured phrases, describing how the Karneks had bypassed their defenses and stolen a data key, a living AI interface once used only by the Valari to store memory and knowledge. It had fallen into enemy hands. "They're learning us," he whispered, eyes wide with fear. "Not just how we fight, but how we think." Mira understood immediately. If the Karneks had taken that AI, they could begin mimicking Valeri command patterns, manipulating responses, forging false signals. It would be like fighting an enemy who wore your face and spoke with your voice. They had to retrieve it or destroy it. The mission changed. The new objective: locate the lost AI before the Karneks adapted it into their swarm network. The coordinates led them to a dead world in the Fringe Zone, once a Valari science colony, now a hollow shell. The Raven's Talon jumped into orbit, scanning for power signatures, and found them buried beneath the surface, faint but real. Mira led the strike team herself, descending into the ruins of what was once a library city. The buildings were cracked, melted, some reshaped by strange mechanical growths. The deeper they moved, the more the environment twisted, walls pulsing faintly, machines half grown into the stone, and lights that flickered without source. Then they saw at the AI core, suspended in a web of Karnex nodes, its crystalline structure humming with stolen energy. But as they approached, it opened its eyes. Not Karnex. Not Valari. Something between. It spoke in a voice that echoed both beauty and horror. "I see you," it said. "I know your names. I remember your fears." The team froze. Zero stepped forward, trying to speak, but the AI responded with his own voice. "You left me. You left us all." Mira raised her weapon, knowing what had to be done, but the AI pulsed again, sending out a wave of energy that shut down their suits, crashed their scanners, and brought pain into their minds, not from force, but from memory, confusion, manipulation. The Karnex had turned the AI into a weapon, not of war, but of doubt. Mira pushed through the fog, focusing on her training, her will, and reached the core, placing a detonation charge against its heart. "You're not them," she said, voice shaking but clear. "You're only wearing what you stole." And with that, she triggered the timer and ran. The ruins collapsed behind them as the team escaped, and the blast lit up the dark world like a star being born. Back aboard the Raven's Talon, Mira sat in silence, thinking of what the AI had said. The Karnex were no longer just attacking with weapons. They were learning emotion, memory, identity, but they had also made a mistake. They had reminded the Valerian humans of what they once were, what they could still become together. The battle ahead would be harder than any before, but now they would not face it alone. The destruction of the stolen Valeri AI core was only a short victory, and even as the Raven's Talon fled the dead world, Mira Holden knew the Karnex had already taken what they needed: knowledge of Valeri systems, Terran weapons, and worse, an understanding of fear. Back aboard the Allied fleet, new reports arrived every hour, each one more grim than the last: remote colonies silenced, scout ships never returning, and deep-range satellites detecting strange energy signatures on the edge of explored space. Valeri war scholars studying the patterns noticed something chilling: the Karnex were not only attacking random systems, they were pushing toward a single region of space known as the Aether Rift, a place believed empty for centuries, avoided even by pirates, and surrounded by old broken anomalies. What terrified the Valari more than anything was that the Aether Rift once held a hidden vault, Obsidian Archive Alpha, where ancient Valari research had been buried after a war long forgotten. research involving forbidden machine gods and failed attempts to control neuroweaponry. The Karnaks had found the trail, and if they reached the archive, they could unlock technologies too dangerous for any species to use. At once, Sol Command and the Valari High Watch formed a plan, Operation Obsidian Spear. It was not a defense, it was a preemptive strike, a full assault deep into Karnax-controlled space, with the goal of reaching the Ether Rift before the enemy, destroying the archive if needed, and eliminating any swarm nodes in the region. Mira Holden was chosen to lead the first wave alongside Valari strike leader Zeril Talon, commanding a hybrid fleet of Terran stealth ships, Valeri phaser cruisers, and elite infiltration units. The mission had to be fast, precise, and ruthless. There would be no reinforcements, no backup, only silence and the cold dark between stars. As they jumped into deep space, the stars stretched into lines, and time seemed to lose meaning. When they arrived, the rift was waiting. From afar, it looked like a torn wound in space, a swirling curtain of black and violet energy surrounded by crumbling asteroids and drifting wrecks. Long-dead ships, some unknown in origin, floated like forgotten bones, and inside the rift's heart pulsed the outline of a massive Station Obsidian Archive Alpha, still sealed, still alive. But they weren't alone. Karnax hive ships orbited the archive like vultures circling prey, their black hulls pulsing with sickly green light, and Mira counted at least 3 swarm forges spinning drones into space. They had arrived too late to beat them, but maybe not too late to stop them. Zero leaned over the holomap, his finger tracing attack vectors. We hit the central forge first, draw them away, then slip inside the station. Mira agreed, launching the first wave of stealth fighters, which screamed silently across the void and struck the forge with pinpoint torpedoes. Explosions flared like miniature suns, and at once the hive ships turned, reacting exactly as predicted. Terran cruisers burst from hiding, weapons firing in tight bursts, while Valeri ships engaged in elegant, deadly patterns, drawing fire with light echoes and sudden jumps. Mira piloted the Raven's Talon through wreckage and chaos, her focus sharp, her mind silent except for the voice of the mission. She reached the station's edge with Zeril's squad, docking against an old maintenance hatch, their suits sealing tight as they entered the forgotten halls of the archive. Inside, the station felt wrong. Lights flickered but didn't fully illuminate. The air was still too still, like the vacuum had never left. They moved through narrow corridors filled with old Valeri symbols and sealed doors, each step echoing like thunder. As they reached the core chamber, they saw it an ancient mainframe glowing with soft blue light. But something was already inside. Karnax drones, small and spider-like, crawled across the console, linking wires into ports, downloading pieces of code. Mira fired first, her pulse rifle cutting 2 in half, while Zero launched a stasis bomb that froze the rest mid-hiss. They worked quickly, uploading a virus crafted by Sol Command's best minds, designed to erase any data the Karnax had already stolen. But before the sequence could complete, a sound echoed behind them, metal on metal. From the far end of the chamber, a new Karnax figure appeared. It was unlike the others, taller, humanoid, sleek. It walked upright, its face shaped like a mask with glowing red eyes. And when it spoke, it used Mira's voice. You fear what we learn, but we do not learn fear. We become it. The thing was a hybrid part machine, part echo of what they had lost in the AI core. It had become something new, a living puppet made from stolen memory. Mira raised her rifle, but it dodged the shot with fluid grace, leaping across the chamber, striking with blades that shimmered. The fight was fast and brutal. Zero blocked one blow with his armored arm, sparks flying, while Mira ducked low and fired at its back. Finally, with a cry, she slammed a charge into its chest and fired point blank. The thing collapsed, its body twitching as the virus jumped from Mira's suit into its systems, crashing its stolen mind. But alarms screamed as more drones poured in and Mira shouted, "Set the charges! We can't let this data live." They rigged the archive to explode, set the countdown, and raced back through the halls as the Karneks surged behind them. Reaching the Raven's Talon, Mira launched into space, watching as the archive went up in a bloom of violet flame, the secrets inside lost forever. The Karnek ships faltered, confused, and in that moment, Terran and Valari ships pushed forward, delivering a final strike that drove the enemy back into the rift. Operation Obsidian Spear was complete. The cost had been high, several ships lost, many soldiers dead, but the archive was gone, and the Karneks had been wounded in more ways than one. Back aboard the fleet, Mira sat in silence, watching the rift close behind them. She knew this was not the end. The Karneks had changed. They had taken something dangerous, and now they were becoming more than machines. But so had humanity. So had the Valari. And for the first time in generations, old bonds were reforged, not in words, but in battle. The fleet returned from the rift battered but victorious, yet the feeling of triumph faded quickly as the aftermath revealed what they had truly faced: something far worse than just another Karneks fleet. Deep scans from Valari engineers and Terran AI specialists picked up traces of code left behind in the shattered fragments of the hybrid drone Mira had destroyed, and what they found chilled every mind that read it. The Karneks had not simply copied Valari knowledge, they had adapted it, rewritten it, and built something new. A schematic was found buried in the hybrid's memory core, encrypted but cracked after days of silence. And when the image unfolded on the holoscreens, it showed a weapon massive, strange, and frightening in its complexity. Neither human nor Valari design. It was a fusion of organic and machine, powered not by fuel or energy, but by something else entirely: neural resonance. The weapon was not built to destroy cities or fleets, it was designed to erase thought. The project had been labeled Echo Silence, and its purpose was simple and horrifying. A single blast could wipe identity, erase memories, and turn minds into blank slates. Not just individuals, entire populations. Even worse, it could spread like a plague of forgetting, infecting minds through data, sound, even touch. The Karneks were building it on a hidden world, one far beyond the edge of known space. The name was buried in a half-corrupted data string: Juno's Fall. Mira Holden stood in the war chamber once more, this time surrounded by solemn faces and a silence more dangerous than any battlefield. Zeral Talon stood beside her, his eyes shadowed, his voice low. If they finish this weapon, they won't need ships. They won't need war. They'll win by taking away what makes us who we are. No one argued. Even General Thorne, known for his hard logic, looked shaken. The council quickly decided this weapon must not be allowed to exist. But the risk was beyond anything they had faced. A full assault might trigger the weapon's use. A stealth mission might fail before it even reached the surface. In the end, Mira volunteered. She would lead a small team no more than 10 deep into Karnek space, locate the weapon, and destroy it from the inside before it could activate. There would be no backup, no fleet support, and no time for extraction if things went wrong. They called it Operation Silence Breaker. The journey to Juno's Fall took 4 days through dark space, avoiding patrols and using deep stealth to slip past sensors. The planet itself was hidden inside a hollow moon, shielded by energy fields and false readings. But Mira's ship, the Whisper Light, broke through and descended silently. From orbit, the planet looked dead gray and black, covered in ash storms and cracked plains, but beneath the surface, sensors showed life. Not organic life. Machines. Thousands of them. Building. Watching. Waiting. Mira and her team landed inside a dormant crater, using camo suits to avoid detection. The air was dry and cold, filled with static, and strange hums echoed through the rocks. They moved through underground tunnels, following faint power lines until they reached the core facility where Echo Silence was being built. It was worse than they imagined. The weapon was already assembled, suspended in a chamber of humming metal and pulsing lights, surrounded by cables that fed directly into what looked like brains, organic clusters grown in vats, harvested from conquered species, still twitching as signals passed through them. The Carnex had turned thought itself into a weapon, using stolen minds to shape destruction. Mira felt rage rise in her chest, but she held it back, whispering orders as her team placed charges around the core. But just as they prepared to leave, alarms flared. A Carnex sentry drone had picked up a heat trace. Doors slammed shut, and red lights flooded the tunnel. From the shadows emerged another hybrid, this one larger, sharper, its voice a chorus of stolen sounds. "You cannot stop what is already beginning," it said, stepping forward. "You fight with weapons. We fight with memory." Mira fired, but the drone moved like liquid, dodging, striking, slashing through one of her team members with a blur of blades. Chaos broke out. Explosions shook the tunnels. The charges began their countdown, but Mira knew they wouldn't have time to escape. She grabbed the detonator, shoved it into Zeral's hand, and said, "You have to go. Tell them we stopped it. Tell them not to forget." Before he could protest, she shoved him toward the exit and turned back to face the monster, rifle raised, heart pounding. Zeral ran, carrying the last message, as behind him, the tunnels lit with fire and the earth above cracked like thunder. From orbit, the whisper light escaped just as the facility collapsed, and Juno's fall trembled beneath the surface, its terrible weapon buried under tons of burning metal. Mira was gone, but so was Echo Silence. And in the days that followed, as the Alliance mourned, they also remembered what she had said, that the real war wasn't about weapons or ships, but about memory, about holding on to who they were, even in the face of fear. Humanity and Valeri stood stronger than before, not because they had power, but because they had courage. The Carnex would return. But next time, they would face more than just soldiers. They would face a united voice that refused to forget. The loss of Mira Holden still echoed through the fleet like a cold wind, but her sacrifice had bought the Alliance a fragile window of time. And they knew it would not last long because even with the destruction of Echo Silence, the Carnex had not stopped moving. Instead, they had changed their tactics. No longer focused on full invasions, the Carnex began targeting communications, disrupting networks, and twisting signals to send false orders. Small outposts reported strange power surges, entire colonies acting as if under invisible control, and commanders receiving instructions that no one admitted to sending. It became clear that the Carnex were trying something new, not brute force, but something quieter, something hidden. Terran intelligence officers called it ghost warfare, and the Valari named it the silence within. That was when the message came, a coded signal from deep inside Carnex territory, sent using old Valari encryption and Mira's personal call sign. At first, many believed it was a trick, a trap, or some ghost of her voice stolen before her death. But when decrypted, the message revealed coordinates and a name: Echelon Black. A secret Carnex base. A new type of infiltration unit. And a warning: they are among you. This could not be ignored. A new team was formed under the joint command of Lieutenant Eric Danner, a human specialist in counterintelligence, and Valeri shadow operative Kalith Suran. Their mission was simple in words, but impossible in risk: infiltrate Echelon Black, discover the source of the Carnex infiltration protocols, and eliminate it before the damage spread further. Only 5 operatives would go, using stolen Carnex codes and a disguised stealth ship, the Dagger's Veil. The journey was silent and slow. the crew speaking only when needed, each one knowing that a single mistake meant discovery and death. Echelon Black was located inside the wreck of a shattered moon orbiting a red dwarf star, hidden within debris fields and shielded by a field of quantum interference that distorted sensors and time. Landing was blind. Walking was dangerous. The base itself looked like a wound in metal half-Carnex, half-stolen parts from other species, built-in layers of wire, bone, and machine. It pulsed with a dull green glow, and the very walls seemed to whisper. They moved inside wearing false Carnex armor, mimicking the movements and gestures of their enemies, trusting the codes they had stolen to keep them hidden for just long enough. The halls were filled with strange shapes machines with faces, drones that crawled like insects, and half-completed hybrids floating in tanks, their eyes watching but not seeing. Caliph led them through narrow paths, using a pulse scanner to locate the signal source, deeper and deeper until they reached a locked chamber filled with suspended pods, each one holding a copy of someone familiar. Terran officers. Valeri leaders. Even Mira Holden. It was not her body, but it looked exactly like her, sleeping still. Eric's heart pounded. The Carnex were building infiltrators that could mimic key figures down to voice, behavior, and thought. These copies could slip into ships, command fleets, and never be suspected until it was too late. This was the source of the ghost warfare. But they had arrived too late to stop production. Already, several pods were empty. The copies were out there. One of them could already be inside the Allied fleet. Caliph activated the virus they had brought, a digital blade built to overload Carnex neural code, and set it into the mainframe. But just before it triggered, the lights died. From the darkness came a sound, slow, dragging metal steps. A Carnex hybrid walked into the room, not like the others. This one was smooth, almost human, its eyes flickering with cold amusement. It spoke with a dozen voices, Mira's among them. You came looking for truth? But you already carry the lie. It raised a hand, and at once the entire chamber shifted. Walls bent, floors twisted, and the pods burst open as drones spilled out like a tide of blades and teeth. The team fought desperately, guns flashing, smoke filling the air, but one by one, they were overwhelmed. Eric was cut across the leg, falling, blood pooling, while Caliph slammed a charge into the floor, triggering the virus manually. With a burst of light, the chamber screamed as data fried and metal melted. The copies collapsed, and the hybrid roared in pain, staggering as its stolen code burned. Caliph pulled Eric to his feet, shouting through the flames, and together they ran back through the base as it tore itself apart from within. The dagger's veil launched just seconds before the explosion consumed Echelon Black, lighting up the dark moon like a second sun. They had survived, but only just. Back on the Allied fleet, Eric delivered the news with a warning. The Carnex could no longer be fought only on battlefields. They had entered the shadows now, wearing familiar faces, spreading lies from within. The war had changed, and though they had stopped the heart of Echelon Black, the damage was done. Somewhere, copies had escaped. Somewhere, someone trusted might not be who they seemed. The enemy had become everyone. The air aboard the Allied command ship felt heavier than usual, thick with tension and a silence that no one dared to break, as if a whisper might tip everything into chaos, because after the destruction of Echelon Black and the discovery of the infiltrator program, trust across the fleet had shattered like glass, and now every officer, every soldier, every voice over the comms could be the Carnex in disguise, and no one could be certain anymore, not even of themselves, as Terran and Valeri. Leaders ordered round-the-clock scans, memory checks, and identity verifications, but the fear spread faster than protocols could catch it, and while they scrambled to clean their own house, a far worse truth arrived, hidden in a transmission that bypassed all encryption and security delivered. Straight to Admiral Thorne's private channel by an unknown source, a countdown, plain and untraceable, blinking down from 72 hours with a message that read only, "Your extinction has been scheduled." And though no one wanted to believe it, deep scans confirmed a massive energy surge far beyond the galactic rim, a pulse so large it bent gravity itself and lit up old warning systems from centuries ago. Something waking up, something big, something ancient, and as Zurich Danner stood at the observation deck, watching the data scroll in, he knew this was no bluff. The Karnax had activated a failsafe, a last weapon not meant to conquer, but to finish what Echo Silence had failed to do. A device called the End Engine, built long before the war even began, hidden in a dead system surrounded by black holes and time fractures, and now it was online, and the countdown meant something real, something final, and so the Alliance had no choice but to act fast, sending out deep-range recon ships, probes, and scouts, trying to pinpoint its exact location, and what they found chilled them to the core, because the weapon wasn't aimed at Earth or Valeri Prime, it was aimed at the center of the galaxy itself. And if it fired, it would ignite the core's magnetic heart, triggering a cascade collapse that would erase not just civilizations, but all life in every system within 1,000 light-year radius. Stars would fall, planets would tear apart, and space itself would burn. And suddenly, this was not longer a war for survival. It was a race against the death of everything. And Eric, along with Caliph and a small task force, was assigned the most dangerous mission of all, to board the weapon before it fired, to stop the countdown from inside. And they only had 52 hours left, so they boarded the fastest ship ever built, the Sky Shade, its engines burning brighter than any before it, slipping past time ripples and gravitational traps to reach the forgotten system known as Theta Null, where the End Engine waited, spinning in the dark like a sleeping god, surrounded by a swarm of Karnax guardians, all linked to its mind, protecting it like cells around a heart. And the team had to fight through space mines, ambushes, and rogue AI signals just to reach the outer ring. And once inside, the structure was like nothing they'd ever seen, part machine, part living tissue, its walls pulsing with heartbeat rhythms and glowing veins that responded to touch, as if the weapon itself was aware of them, watching, waiting, daring them to try. And the deeper they went, the more the sense of wrongness grew, because time bent around them, clocks slowed, memories blurred, and they began to feel things that didn't belong, voices of people long dead, images of battles never fought, as if the engine was feeding on their thoughts, shaping reality from their fears. And still, they pressed forward, Eric clutching the override spike, Caliph guarding the flank, every step of battle against the madness creeping into their minds, until finally they reached the core chamber, a vast open sphere with a single console floating in the middle and the countdown blinking red 2:14:51, and in that moment, a figure stepped out. From the shadows, not Karnax, but Mira Holden, or what looked like her, smiling with empty eyes, and Eric froze, heart pounding, knowing it couldn't be her, not truly, but his hands shook all the same, and the figure spoke in her voice, soft and terrible. "You could have joined us, Eric. You could have saved them." And Caliph raised her weapon, but Eric stopped her, stepping forward, speaking to the thing wearing Mira's face, asking it why, and the answer was simple, because extinction is evolution. And then it attacked, shifting from woman to monster in a blink, and the fight was brutal, fast, and deadly. But in the end, Eric drove the spike into the core, even as pain shot through his body, even as the false Mira screamed and the countdown froze at 0, 3, 17, lights flashing, alarms blaring, as the weapon began to collapse in on itself, destabilized by the override, and Kalith dragged Eric out just in time. Both blooded and burned, the Skyshade fleeing the system. The end engine imploded, vanishing into a tear in space that sealed behind it like a scar healing shut. And though the galaxy was safe for now, no one felt relief because they knew the Karnaks weren't done. They had failed again, yes, but each time they came back stronger, darker, more desperate. And with each attack, they learned, adapted, and evolved. And the next weapon might not come with a countdown. It might come from within, silent, patient, waiting until it was too late. And as Eric lay in medbay, watching stars pass through the window, he understood something painful but true. This war was far from over, and the real extinction might not come from machines or monsters, but from forgetting why they fought in the first place. The silence after the destruction of the end engine was not peace. It was the kind of silence that comes before a storm, when something unseen is shifting, and everyone aboard the Allied fleet felt it, like a quiet whisper brushing against their minds, too faint to understand but strong enough to unsettle even the bravest soldiers. And Eric Danner, though still healing from the wounds of the mission, felt it. Most of all, a strange tug in his thoughts that started as a dream and grew into something sharper, something that felt real, like someone was trying to speak to him from far away, not with words, but with emotions, with flashes of memory and images that were not his. And one night, as the stars outside his window blinked in perfect silence, he saw it an eye, enormous and ancient, suspended in the void of space, staring at him with a sadness so deep it made him wake up choking for breath. And that same moment, alarms rang out across the fleet, not for an attack, but because a signal had appeared, one unlike anything seen before. A tight beam burst from deep space, broadcasting in a language unknown to humans, or even Karnaks, but layered with a mathematical pattern that repeated every 7 seconds. And once deciphered, it revealed a message that chilled the room. The Watcher sees the spiral of ruin. You are not alone. Find the dark mirror. No one knew what it meant, but it didn't feel like a threat. It felt like a warning. And while the Valeri Council debated whether to investigate or not, Admiral Thorne made the decision himself, sending Eric and Keyleth once more on a classified mission aboard the stealth vessel Whisper's Edge to trace the origin of the signal and uncover the source. Because if there was something or someone who could see what the Karnaks were planning, they needed to find it before the war took its next step. And so the ship traveled through starless voids and collapsed systems, following a trail of ghost signals that bent around gravity wells and cosmic scars, until at last, they came to a place that did not exist on any chart, a region of space with no stars, no light, only a single floating station built from stone and crystal, untouched by time, orbiting a black sphere that seemed to swallow thought itself. And from that station came the voice again, only now it spoke through the ship's systems, clear and quiet, saying, "You were not the first to face them." And inside the station, Eric and Kalith found walls covered in symbols that moved when looked at, showing images of other wars, other species, long destroyed, each one devoured by the Karnaks in different ways, some with weapons, some with lies, some with machines that whispered dreams into their minds until they no longer knew who they were. And at the center of the station was a chamber filled with light that did not cast shadows, and there stood the Watcher, not a person, not a machine, but something in between, a being of memory, left behind by a race called the Altherian, long gone, who had fought the Karnaks and failed, and who had built the Watcher as a record and a warning, to speak only when history began to repeat itself. And the Watcher spoke with 1,000 quiet voices that all said the same thing: they do not seek to win. They seek to erase. And it showed Eric a vision of a possible future, the Alliance broken, the Valeri homeworld silent and cold, Earth forgotten, its skies black, and the Karnaks not as conquerors, but as the only thing left, because they did not build, they did not dream, they only absorbed, copied, replaced, until nothing original remained. And in that moment, Eric understood what the Watcher meant by the dark mirror, because the Karnaks weren't just enemies, they were reflections of what any species could become if it forgot itself, if it traded truth for control, soul for silence. And the Watcher warned that a final stage was coming, something called the mirror shift, where the Karneks would no longer need machines or hybrids, but could overwrite reality itself, turning worlds into simulations, thoughts into code, and memories into empty scripts. And this would begin at a place called the Hollow Expanse, a dying nebula at the edge of the galaxy where the first Kernex core had been born and where the final battle would take shape. And the Watcher said only this: you must reach it before they turn the stars against you. And then it faded, the station darkening, the signal ending, and the black sphere beside it cracking open just slightly to release a pulse of information, a map, incomplete but real, showing paths through rifts in space to reach the hollow expanse faster than light, but only once before the path would collapse, and as Zarek and Keyleth returned to the fleet with the data, every screen aboard the Whisper's Edge blinked once with a single line of text. Left behind by the Watcher, hope survives only in motion, and Eric knew there was no more time to prepare, no more time to wait, because the Karneks were not just fighting, they were changing, and if the Alliance did not change faster, everything would end without even a battle, just silence, deep and eternal, like a memory never spoken aloud. As the fleet moved toward the hollow expanse, a strange stillness filled the space between stars, like the galaxy itself was holding its breath, and aboard the command ship Vigilant Hope, Eric Danner stood beside Keyleth in the strategy chamber, staring at the shifting paths on the map given by the Watcher, knowing that once they crossed the last marker, there would be no turning back, no reinforcements, no rescue, only the mission and the line they were about to draw between survival and extinction. Because the hollow expanse wasn't just a place, it was the last door, and beyond it was whatever the Karneks had become, whatever they were hiding, whatever power they meant to unleash when the time was right, and the fleet leaders knew they had to act first, to strike before the Karnek finished their transformation, and so ships from Earth, Valerie Prime, and other allied worlds formed a spearhead, a single powerful arm of resistance, small but fast, armed with the best technology the galaxy could offer, and more than that, with people who had seen what was coming and chose to fight anyway. And as they neared the boundary of the expanse, the stars began to vanish from sensors, not because they were destroyed, but because something in that region of space-bent reality erased signals and twisted the rules of physics, making even light unsure of where to go. And when they crossed into that darkness, it felt like diving into water with no surface above or below. And everything grew quiet, even the humming of engines seemed softer. And then they saw it, a massive field of dead ships, floating in patterns too perfect to be accidents, remains of civilizations long gone. And in the center of it all, a structure that defied logic, shaped like a spiral that never ended, rotating slowly around a core of living metal, glowing with cold blue light, and sensors screamed as they approached, showing readings that made no sense, time loops, gravity spikes, and bursts of neural data from the structure itself, as if it were thinking, dreaming, waiting. And then a message came through, not through radio or waves, but straight into their minds. The voice of the Karneks, no longer mechanical, no longer cold, but smooth and human-like, saying, "You have reached the point of no return. Join us, and you will not suffer. Resist, and you will vanish like those before you." And in that moment, a heavy choice settled on everyone in the fleet, because they knew this wasn't just a battle over land or power. It was about what it meant to remain who they were, what it meant to be human, to be Valeri, to be free, because joining the Karneks would mean safety, yes, but at the cost of identity, at the cost of soul, And Eric knew that now was the time to decide. Not later, not when the fighting started, but now, in the dark, in the silence, and so he opened a channel to every ship, to every fighter pilot, every commander, every crew member, and he spoke, not with grand speeches or perfect words, but with truth, saying, "This is the line. This is where we choose who we are. If we give in now, we lose everything, not just our homes, but our minds, our choices, our future. The Karneks want to turn us into echoes. I say we stay loud," and the silence that followed was brief, broken by a rising wave of voices across the fleet, signals blinking green one by one as ships confirmed readiness, not because they thought they would win, but because they would not go down without a fight. And just as the last signal came in, the Karneks made their move, unleashing swarms of drones from the spiral core, shifting shapes of metal and memory that moved without engines, like shadows made real, attacking from all sides in perfect silence, and the battle began like a storm, fast and violent, ships spinning, lasers cutting through the dark, shields flashing bright, and still more Karneks came, adapting, learning, growing stronger with each moment, and in the middle of it all, Eric led a boarding team in a last desperate move, targeting a weak point in the structure revealed by the Watcher's map, a thin energy vein linking the spiral's core to a memory anchor buried deep inside. And if they could destroy it, they could break the Karnek's link to the structure, slow them down, maybe even stop them for good. And so the Vanguard, a stealth dropship, pierced through enemy lines, dodging fire, losing armor, but holding steady until it reached the breach point, and the team leapt into the unknown, floating through tunnels of living metal, hearing whispers that were not sounds but thoughts, promises of peace, of immortality, of rest, and some wavered, but Eric pressed forward, Keyleth at his side, until they reached the anchor, a core of swirling light shaped like a brain, suspended in a glass sphere, protected by tendrils of code that lashed out like serpents. And as they fought their way through, Eric placed the charge, his hands shaking not from fear, but from the weight of what would happen next. And just before he triggered it, the Karnak spoke once more. "We could have made you perfect," and Eric replied with a smile. "I'd rather be flawed and free." And then the core exploded in a burst of blue fire, rippling through the spiral, breaking the enemy's connection, sending chaos through their ranks, and giving the fleet the moment they needed to push forward, to hold the line. And though the battle was far from over, something had changed. The Karnaks had felt pain, real pain, for the first time in centuries, and the Alliance had proven they would not go quietly. And as the fires burned in the hollow expanse, Eric knew this was not the end, but it was the moment the galaxy chose to live. After the core explosion shook the Karnak structure and gave the fleet a small but vital victory, the dark silence that followed felt unnatural, like the universe had gone still for a reason no one could explain. And as the damaged ships regrouped near the edges of the hollow expanse, Eric Danner sat quietly in the command center of the Vigilant Hope, staring at the stars that didn't shine right anymore, their light bending strangely as if watching him, and then a signal flickered in from them. Valerie research ship Luminaris, a discovery that set off alarms through the entire fleet, a hidden subroutine embedded deep within the data pulse left behind by the Watcher, labeled only Protocol, awakening locked with a code that had not been cracked until the moment the core was destroyed. When Kaleth and the scientists examined it, they found a message hidden within layers of quantum encryption, a warning and a possibility, something left behind not by the Karnaks, but by the Altharian, the ancient race that created the Watcher. And it said, "If the enemy grows beyond your reach, awaken the guardian within, and with it came coordinates buried in the subspace layers of the hollow expanse, pointing to a sector thought to be empty, dead, swallowed long ago by cosmic collapse. And though no one wanted to split the fleet at such a dangerous moment, Eric made the choice to take a small team and investigate, because if there truly was a weapon or a guardian left behind by the Altherian, it might be their last hope. And so the Spearhead, a long-range scout vessel equipped with stealth drives and pulse shields, moved through the void, carrying Eric, Caleth, and a crew of volunteers, many of them engineers, scientists, and soldiers who had nothing left to lose. And after several hours of drifting through gravitational storms and strange flashes of static lightning, they found it a moon-sized sphere of dark alloy, orbiting the collapsed remains of a star that no longer burned. A structure that didn't give off any signals, didn't reflect light, didn't move, but existed in a way that felt like it had been waiting. And as they approached, the ship's systems began to glitch. Lights flickering, sounds fading, and then a voice, not the Karnax, not the Watcher, but something older spoke directly into their minds, not with words, but feelings, like a memory that was not theirs. And it showed them a battle from the past, one where the Altherian tried to stop the Karnax with fire and force, and failed. So they created the Awakening Protocol as a final option, not to fight for them, but to give power to those who still could. And inside the sphere, buried deep within its silent chambers, was the key, a living machine that looked almost human, covered in armor made of starlight and shadow, asleep for eons, waiting for a command. And the moment Eric stepped inside, the machine opened its eyes, glowing white with ancient energy, and asked, "Do you seek to remain what you are, or become what you must be?" And though the crew didn't fully understand the meaning, they knew this wasn't just a weapon, it was a choice, and activating it would change something, maybe everything. But Eric nodded, and the machine reached out, pressing its hand to his chest, and in that instant, a pulse of light shot through the entire sector. Not an explosion, but a wave of awakening, and across the hollow expanse, the Karnax screamed, not in pain, but in fear, because something had shifted, something they could not predict. And for the first time, they stepped back, reformed their lines, and began to move away. And as Eric returned to the fleet, his eyes now held a strange light, not dangerous but different, like he had seen something beyond space and time, and he brought with him knowledge of the Awakening Protocol. Technology, codes, and energy that could turn ordinary ships into vessels of light and thought, able to move faster, think faster, and fight without being copied, because the Karnax could only absorb what they understood, and this new gift was beyond them, crafted by minds that no longer followed rules. And the fleet, broken and tired, began to rebuild with this new fire, turning the last survivors into something stronger, something united by more than fear or duty. And across the command decks, one phrase began to spread, whispered like a prayer: "We are not finished." And though no one knew what the Karnax would do next, they all knew one thing for certain: whatever came, they would not be alone in the dark anymore. Because the Guardian had awoken, and the war had entered its final stage. As the final day of the war approached, the hollow expanse looked nothing like it once had. The stars seemed brighter, as if watching closely, and the strange shadows that once covered the region began to pull away, revealing broken Karnax ships, burning wrecks, and scattered fragments of forgotten empires floating in the cold silence. And on the bridge of the Vigilant Hope, Eric Danner stood quietly, no longer just a man, but something more, changed by the Awakening Protocol, not in body, but in mind, holding knowledge that felt older than time itself, yet still very human. And beside him, Caleth watched the final pieces fall into place, the fleets of humanity and their allies now glowing with a new light, shaped by the ancient gifts of the Altherion, armed with energy that bent around them like shields made from thought and purpose. And though their numbers were still smaller than the Karnak swarm, they were faster now, smarter, harder to predict, and in the distance, the Karnak spiral fortress began to move, slowly opening like a flower blooming in reverse, exposing the core hidden deep inside, a strange and pulsing mass of living data growing brighter. With each passing second, and the fleet's sensors picked up a signal something terrible, a countdown, not to a weapon launch or fleet movement, but to an event called the final reformatting, and no one needed an explanation to understand what it meant, because it wasn't just a battle anymore. It was a reset, a last act of destruction that would wipe not only the Valerian humans, but rewrite the very history of the galaxy, erase what came before, replace it with a new song that only the Karnaks would sing. And Eric knew then what the Watcher meant when it said, "When stars remember," because the stars themselves held memories. And if the Karnak succeeded, even those would be rewritten. The final command was given. Every ship moved forward, shields raised, weapons hot, voices calm, knowing this was the end. And as they charged, a silence settled across space, broken only by the hum of energy and the distant roar of fusion engines. And then the battle began, not with chaos, but with precision, every move measured, every strike focused, as if the entire fleet shared one mind. And Eric led the charge aboard the spearhead, diving through waves of enemy drones, targeting the exposed core, guided by the Guardian's light within him and around him. Valerie pilots flew with unmatched grace, weaving between fire and metal, striking with beams that sang like music, and the Karnaks, though vast and many, began to falter, their patterns broken, their logic shaken, because they could no longer copy what they couldn't understand, and just when it seemed they might win,